So I think for Trump right now, Israel attacking Iran is not the option. More importantly, his best friends in Qatar and Saudi Arabia are telling him if the Iranian government is overthrown, there will be chaos, and that chaos is not good for Saudi Arabia or Qatar.
Yassamine Mather. You know, there's a moment in this interview where I just sat back and thought, wait, did she really just say that? Because try to imagine this gentle, almost fragile looking woman telling me she once volunteered for a dangerous operation inside Iran. And not just symbolic task either. No, she helped set up an underground anti-government radio station for the fedayeen somewhere out in the mountains between Tehran and Kurdistan. And she brushes it off as if it's like nothing. No wonder they don't want me back, she says, laughing a little. She mentions it right at the end of the interview, almost like an afterthought. Incredible. What a life. And this is exactly the reason why I keep doing long form content. These conversations go way past an hour because they need the space. People reveal things when you don't rush them. I really hope you stay with us for this one because listening to Yassamine in Oxford, seeing how she moves between the past and the present, was honestly something special. She even walked us through parts of the university afterwards, places you normally can't get into unless you've got the right pass, which of course she obviously does. Anyway, if you want to keep up with episodes like this one, go ahead and subscribe, hit the bell, all the usual things. Though to be fair, with the level of shadow banning on this channel, and I'm not kidding, even that won't guarantee you'll get notified. But hey, we do what we can. And one more thing before we start, I just published my breakdown of Trump's national security strategy from November 2025 over on my Substack. I know it sounds dry, but you really have to read it to believe it. That's what I did, so you don't have to. It's up now. Check it out. It's a genuine eye-opener into the psychology of someone who is auditing quite openly for the role of a global strongman. But next, Yassamine Mather. Yassamine Mather. Do I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What a pleasure meeting you here at the University in Oxford in your office on a rainy British day. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for coming all the way to Oxford.
It's my pleasure, really. Now, I was really looking forward to this conversation because you are a Iran specialist. Is that a accurate description?
I have written a lot on Iran. Okay. I think there are many more theoretical people on the subject of Iran. So I would say they are more Iran specialists than I am.
You're modest, yes.
But because my academic subject isn't history, is not contemporary history, is not sociology. But I suppose I've been involved in Iranian politics from childhood, through my families and myself. And I write a lot on Iranian politics, but specialist is a difficult word, so yeah.
Again, you're modest. But since you brought your family up, in a nutshell, and as far as you're at liberty to talk about, give us a little bit a roundup of your family, pre-revolution, post-revolution, Iran, Great Britain. How did it go?
My paternal family, every family in Iran had a lot of divisions. So some people were pro-Shah, some people in the same family were opposed to the Shah. My paternal family had both. So I had an uncle, for example, who was in the young officers of Tudeh, the Communist Party of Iran. My father was very close to Ardashir Zahedi as a friend, and they are related. Okay. And so my father was involved, this is before my birth, in the coup of 1953 in a very negative way.
Oh,
I won't go, I mean, it's what people have told me. Maybe some of it is exaggerated, but they were very close and he was involved in that. Okay. But then, for various reasons, he left my mother and he lived away from us. So my childhood memories of him are up to the age of 2.5, 3. My mother and her family were urban Iranians, reasonably well off. They didn't consider themselves wealthy, but they considered themselves probably amongst the upper middle classes. In my mother's family, some people had important jobs. One of my cousins was the Attorney General under the Shah. My mother worked from the day I remember. She worked in the central bank in Bank Melli in Iran, and she was towards the end she became in charge of the industrial loans section. And it was very good political background for me, because she always came back telling us about who was bribing whom, what kind of corruption was going on. And the guardian in the house was her brother, my uncle, and he really was the father figure. So he was very puritanical about corruption. So my poor mother was always told, you can't even accept a dinner, or never mind jewels. And these industrialists, you can imagine, this was the Shah's Iran, development was happening. These people were ready to pay anything, to get their loans through. But my uncle was very, very strict. So we heard as a child, I was probably 4 or 5, I heard these stories about corruption. And she had a very strange attitude at that time towards the Pahlavi dynasty. She looked down on them. They were the nouveau riche. Not because we were ancien money or anything, but because the people she dealt with were the aristocracy of Iran, the Gajars, the people who were super rich, who had kept their money despite the Pahlavi era, but who did look down on Pahlavi as the 2 generations kings. The Gajars were in power, for almost 2 centuries. So the contradictions were obvious. So it was this very strange attitude about class that affected me. And my maternal aunt also was married to a feudal. And we kept hearing about land reform. The Shah had done this land reform. Everything was distributed to the poor peasants. And there was truth and not all truth in that. So every landlord could have kept one village at least, and they all kept their best village. And so in the summers, I used to go to this village, and I became very conscious from very young age of the class conflict. Here we were, going from Tehran to Azerbaijan. We visited this village for almost exactly 30 days. And with the family, her family came as well. And these poor peasants who clearly lived in terrible houses, who had absolutely no money, were supposed to bring gifts to us as we arrived, right? And I think from a very young age, I could see, if you like, the aristocracy, the middle classes, the poor, and it made me class conscious without being class conscious doesn't mean you necessarily support the working class, but I was well aware of class status, if you like, from very young age. And later, I have to say that after the Shah's fall, my mother didn't consider them nouveau riche. Then she was pro-Shah, but that was after he fell.
When we talk about Shah Reza Pahlavi, personal anecdote, my own mother cried when he died because she had this Western idealized image of him and his wife Soraya in her mind, which was portrayed like, sophisticated propaganda in order to the Western population to support the American installed dynasty, of course.
Exactly.
But that showed me, how deep that actually goes. Yeah. So I make it in those interviews. I always make it very black and white. I'm aware. Yeah. But would it be fair to say that Shah Reza Pahlavi was one of the most, how shall I call it? Was he actually a monarch? I know he was a monarch, but was he not a dictator? And was he not, with the Savak, a very, very brutal dictator?
Absolutely. So he started as a very weak person, as you know, because the Allies moved his father to exile because he was close to Hitler. He kind of supported Hitler. There are debates on, I don't think he was a fascist. He supported Germany because he thought Germany could develop Iran. But so they moved him. He was young. He was very inexperienced. And even in 1953, he was very much a weak person that the British took out, then the Americans and the British put back in power. But as he stayed, he became much more confident of himself. And he became a dictator that at times was even too big for his own shoes, in that he was telling, in the 1970s, he was telling Britain, you're not doing the right thing because you're not arresting people who go on strike, for example, right? So you can imagine he was becoming a dictator. 1953 was important because repression started then. He arrested not just people who were in the National Front, people who were in the Tudeh party, who had campaigned against him, who were working against him, but then he became paranoid about his own rules. So even in his own surroundings, he was arresting people, releasing them, but arresting them. I'm sure amongst his relatives, there were people who were scared of him as well. And true or not, and here I think it's more myth than reality, there were rumors that, for example, he had killed his own brother, Ali Reza Pahlavi. So if you like, everyone was very scared of him. When I became aware of his dictatorship was after Siakal, after the events where the guerrilla movement started in Iran. And I suppose the Americans and the British saw that as a real threat because they had dealt in a way with Tudeh. The Soviet Union was not very popular because of various events in Iran and in the region. So there it was a new young movement, brave, most of them children of urban petty bourgeoisie, urban middle class, university students, educated students. And for that, he was taking no tolerance, right? So people were arrested, spent a few months, and they were executed. There was not even pretense of... there were pretense of trials where you knew it was a military trial for a political prisoner, so you knew what would happen. And those he couldn't kill in kind of execute officially, we had in cases where he said, 8 people were fugitives. They were running away from Evin prison, the most high security prison in Iran. It still is a very high security. And the soldiers have just shot them. So, all the signs of a dictatorship. The one thing that affected me when I left Iran before my high school finished, but in the first years of high school, 2 years of high school, he had written this book, The White Revolution. And in school, we had 1 hour a week. A subject was the book. It was a terrible book. I mean, I wasn't very much into social sciences, but even I could tell this is a terrible book. It was about his achievements, about the threat of the red and the black, the reactionaries and the communists were all conspiring jointly together against him because he was the white, he was the light and the white. So yeah, he had all the signs of a dictator. And I think people knew that. His secret police was Savak was listening to people, even if it wasn't as powerful as people thought it was.
Yeah, but they were brutal.
They were brutal, and therefore people were very careful. So in my family, if relatives came, people talked about everything, right? But if there were non-relatives, you'd be very careful what you would say.
Now, I think we cannot discuss Iran without discussing how the situation that we are seeing today came to be, the root cause. And the root cause, or one of the root causes, is of course, surprise, surprise, American and UK meddling, because Iran had a moderate, what was it, Prime Minister, I believe Mosaddegh was Prime Minister, which was putsched by one of the CIA stooges that arranged the putsch was the grandson of the American president, Roosevelt, Kermit Roosevelt, right? I read his autobiography where he actually is bragging about the whole thing. Yeah. Now, what happened here, again, the Americans and the UK took a moderate, democratically elected prime minister out. He lost his life in the putsch, and installed Shah Reza Pahlavi, also reinstalled, I should say. Yeah. And as a consequence, we have today the regime. I mean, people need to understand. So there was this putsch, and the putsch is at the root of the mullah regime today.
Absolutely.
Please elaborate.
I think Mosaddegh was very popular, irrespective of what you think of him.
Till today, actually.
Even today, yeah. Well, irrespective of what you think about, did he have U-turns? Did he not do steady everything that he should have done? Was his politics perfect? We all have faults, and you have to accept that. But he was very popular. And what he took on was actually, what he was demanding was reasonably modest in terms of oil income. He wanted to nationalize oil. Remember that the British had told the people of the oil region of Iran, Khuzestan, that BP was benzine pars. Right? So British petroleum was sold to the local. So the local people actually thought this was benzine pars, which was a lie. I mean, all the money was going to British petroleum, and he had made very modest demands. If you, I've only my memory only allows me what I've read a few years ago. But for example, what he was asking was 50% of the income should return to Iran, or even 49 to 51. It wasn't unusual. What happened was that I think the British were definitely against this, because this would have been a precedent
exactly.
apart from anything else. But the Americans took it differently. For the Americans, this became, on the one hand, because they were the up-and-coming hegemon power, they wanted to show themselves more amenable, but also more amenable to talk to Iran. But so originally, the Americans were telling Mosaddegh, we will support some of your demands. And I think he was maybe too optimistic about those promises in some parts of his premiership. But the British were obviously closer to the Americans, and the British convinced the Americans that this would be dangerous for the region. The British were pulling this story, and there's evidence that they were actually telling lies to the Americans and the American press, that Mosaddegh was in
Communist.
collusion
Yeah.
with the communists. And that was obviously in the US, that was what made the CIA involved, changed the whole scenario. And now there is proof that they, for example, planted stories about today, about Mossadegh's own health, about his persona, in newspapers such as New York Times and Washington Post, not just, at that time, these were run-of-the-mill, but generally very popular, very important newspapers. It's interesting because there's a MI5 guy who says in one of the interviews, as you rightly say, none of these people are ashamed of what they did. They're quite proud of what they did. There's a British guy who says some of the stories we planted in Washington Post or New York Times, we couldn't even get the BBC to use them, right? So you can see that they were manipulating. The coup itself took a very short time, partly because they weren't prepared. There had been a coup. The young officer corps of today had warned Mosaddegh about that coup about a month and a bit earlier, I think 5-6 weeks earlier. And the government had managed to overcome that coup. Right? So they were quite confident. They thought they would get away with this. There was no immediate danger because they'd gone over that. And of course, from all the stories you hear, money was paid to hoodlums, basically.
Yeah.
And they set fire to place. This wasn't a sophisticated coup. It didn't require military. They didn't use the army. A lot of the army were sympathetic to Mosaddegh. But they immediately arrested the young officers who had been identified as being associated with Tudeh or anyone with any leftish nationalist feeling. And then they decided how to. The Shah wasn't returning even, but they took Mosaddegh under house arrest. They kept him there, and soon afterwards, the Shah returned. So
I even heard that the Shah was hesitant to return. They kind of pulled him by the ears back to Iran.
Exactly, because he was as I said, at the time, he wasn't the dictator he later became. He was quite a weak man. He'd left with Soraya, a wife that he did love, because I don't think he loved the other wives that he married. And I think he would have been quite happy to live in exile at that time. Yeah.
Without going into too much depth, but I would like to highlight as a question: would it be fair to say, without this coup, there would be no mullah regime in Iran today?
I think I could say that. I think if there had been a nationalist government, it might have not been ideal. I'm not building this image that Mossadegh would have liberated Iran and everything. There would have been conflict. There was the Cold War. There would have been the Soviet-US meddling in Iran and so on. But I think, some people say, well, look at what happened to all these Ba'athist Arab nationalist governments. They all became corrupt, they all became dictators, and so on. I think there was more strength to Iran's democracy from various layers of society for it to have had a better future than the Ba'athist nationalists of the Arab world. Maybe this is too optimistic, and it's one of those things, how can you tell, because it didn't survive. But I would have said definitely the rise of the clergy has two reasons. One is the coup and the intervention and the fact that people became completely disillusioned with anything the West could do for a country. But it also had its own, the way the Shah dealt with the opposition. So people forget, and the young generation in Iran isn't aware probably, that the Shah was very religious in his appearance. Maybe he wasn't, because from what I can hear, he was a womanizer, he definitely drank alcohol and so on. But in his public persona, he presented himself as religious. For example, he often said that there is a Shia imam who is supposed to be, he comes to people's dreams and helps. He's like a saint. And he often mentions that this guy came and on one occasion he said, he took my hand. Now this particular saint hasn't got a hand, so it became part of a joke that he did. But he did. He went to Mashhad, he went to religious places. His wife went to these religious places, right? The way he dealt with the religious opposition was very different to the way he dealt with nationalists and communists. So if you were a nationalist, he either tried to get you in his own circles, and quite a lot of former Mosaddegh supporters did join governments that Shah's prime ministers set up. But if you were a leftist, you were definitely arrested, executed. And if you were a nationalist who wanted to remain a nationalist, right, who didn't support, who was completely opposed, who kept going on about Mosaddegh, you were definitely under repression. While the religious people didn't face this kind of repression, Khomeini was sent into exile. His equivalents on the nationalist side or the left side would have been arrested and executed.
I always wondered about this, why Khomeini survived in the first place.
I think he didn't kill, you name me one Ayatollah that the Shah killed. He didn't kill an Ayatollah.
Yeah, but no other Ayatollah was as...
as powerful or as strongly opinionated. Yeah. Yes, but he could have arrested others who supported Khomeini. So I think the religious movement got a very easy time, but they also had other factors in their favor. So if you were a lefty, you would have had to organize a meeting in a house, in a university, you had to book a room. These people had the mosques. So they had a natural place for mobilizing. They could use the mosque for building their own networks as well. So you had the mosque. In some places, you might have had a school associated with the mosque. Some of the bigger schools, high schools in Tehran were associated with were close to some of the mosques. So you had this network, which the other opposition, there was also a pan-Iranist, for example, or opposition. The other opposition didn't have those. You had the natural resources, if you like, if you were a religious opposition.
Now, whilst we walk us from the past into the present, there's of course one topic that we cannot neglect, and that's the Iraq-Iran war. And again, I know I make it very black and white. Yeah. So, if we take for a moment the point of view of Iraq, and I read a couple of stories. So imagine you are fighting in Iraq's war against Iran, a war that was fought in the interest and instigation of America. Then you get captured by Iran. You spend 15, 18 years in captivity as a prisoner of war. Then you are released back home to Iraq and find that the same country for which you have fought, for which your friends have died, for which you have spent 15, 18 years in captivity, that same country has bombed your own country back into the Stone Age. Yeah. So I often think, I saw an interview it was taken somewhere in rural America. And the interviewer asked, why do they hate us? And a very simple person, simple in terms of not rich, just a normal person. I think it was a farmer also. And he said, because they think we're rich, but we ain't rich, right? So there is this massive discrepancy with reality and what people actually think. I mean, what else is new? Yeah. But it struck me so because this person was honestly flabbergasted. Yeah, they think we're rich, but we ain't rich. Yeah, based on But coming back to Iraq and Iran, so this war was, as I said, already instigated, and I mean, it was even they sold weapons to both sides. And Reagan said then, what was it? So he said, my mind says yes, but my heart says no. This kind of nonsense, when it came to the Contra,
Iran Contra,
which is a topic in itself. I'm not even sure if we want to dive into this, But from Iranian perspective now, the Iraq-Iran war was of course devastating. I mean, a whole generation of youngsters between 12 and 18, 19.
Yeah.
These waves, these human waves, how they called it, through the minefields to, how many people died on Iranian side?
I think the minimum is 500,000.
In a time frame of?
8-year war. It was 8 years, the war itself. But you are right that some prisoners stayed longer. But yes, it was 8 years, the war.
Yeah. So Khomeini was sacrificing consciously a lot of people.
And there was an encouragement to have more children because before the Contra event, the only thing Iran had was larger number of people. You're right, waves after waves of young people, and most of them, of course, from the poorer backgrounds. The rich were sending their kids abroad. The rich were paying bribes. So this was mainly ordinary Iranians who died. The devastation was terrible. There were periods during that war where Khomeini could have, or the state, the Iranian Islamic State, could have made peace. Could have
years earlier.
And they didn't.
We see the same in Ukraine, by the way.
Yeah. And in some ways, it would have been better for Iran had they done that. Not just in terms of territory gains and so on, but most importantly in terms of the human cost, which was terrible. There is one thing to remember, and because the question of who attacked whom is very poignant in this war. And of course, Iraq attacked, and my understanding is that was the summary of the UN as well. However,
Sorry, before you continue, I think this is a very important point. Iraq attacked, because there's still today voices kind of try to switch the history on its head.
No, the first military attack was Iraq, right? I was in Iran. I don't think there was any doubt that Iraq attacked. You could say that Khomeini was agitating rebellion of Shias in Iraq. The Shia population of Iraq is larger than the Sunni population, and the Baathists were Sunni.
But the Sunnis are in power.
And the Baathists and the Sunnis were in power. He knew very well, he had been in exile in Najaf, he knew the Shia community, he knew the Shia clergy. He was agitating rebellion against Saddam. But that is different to actually waging war. So the actual war started by Iraq. And you are right, the US was very keen for this war to take place. Later, I don't think because they had any problems with Saddam, but because of financial reasons, maybe because of hostages in Lebanon and so on, the United States and Iran got involved in this wonderful story. We won't go into details, but just to give a very short summary.
Please do.
Iran was buying arms from the Zionist Israeli state. The money was being paid to the Contras in Nicaragua to fight the anti-imperialist Nicaraguan government. And all of this had happened with some friends of Reagan, Oliver North and McFarlane, arriving in Iran with a cake for Ayatollah Khomeini. So you couldn't make a movie about it. I think the whole story is so bizarre that when I kept listening to it for the first time, I just couldn't believe it. In my mind, what is significant, what is significant is, in my mind, it broke for me any thoughts that Khomeini was genuinely anti-imperialist or anti-Israel. I didn't have any illusions, obviously, I'd never supported him. But when I heard all of that, I thought this man would sell anything for his own power and gain. He clearly isn't even anti-Israeli. I knew he was an anti-imperialist, but I thought he's not even anti-Israeli.
It's maybe worth noting that the American Congress explicitly forbade Reagan to put those funds where he wanted them to be, which is why they kind of circumvented the American Congress. And then again, when Reagan was questioned, and it's not the first and probably not the last senile president that we saw in America, he said, yeah, my brain says no, but my head, or the other way around, my heart says no and my brain says yes, or something like this. So it's really idiotic. Yeah. Despite the fact that it costs hundreds of thousands of lives, not only in Nicaragua, but yeah, this is incredible. Yeah. Now, where do we go from here, step by step into the present? Maybe worth the hostage crisis, which cost Jimmy Carter his presidency, this botched rescue mission. Worth mentioning, yeah, because it's such another detail that you would have, I don't know if you would have it in a movie even, yeah, that at the very same day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, what happened?
They were released.
Yes.
There is a story that was deliberate, that there had been, I think it's too much of a coincidence.
That's what I'm aiming at. Yeah. So there was some background.
So they had worked with the Republicans one way or another, and in those discussions, they had agreed somehow that the release would be there. Now, this could have been, because this was long before the Contras, but this is maybe the first initial contacts between the Republicans and the Islamic Republic.
So to be specific, so apparently there were some agreements to keep the hostages in captivity until Ronald Reagan kind of won the elections. That was the thing, yeah. And then, as a kind of token of whatever, how do you call it, gratitude or whatever, they were released exactly at the same day, which reminded me on Trump's inauguration. There were some similarities with the hostages release, also the hostages from Hamas release. He was a day late, yeah, but I think he had this in his mind when, as a Trump, when he organized this.
These things can't be coincidence. I don't believe in that kind of coincidence. Carter was unlucky in many of the attempts, but the attempts were doomed to fail as well in some way. And in a way, it's not bad for Iran that some of those attempts failed, because right now, as Trump considered and still considers military operations in Iran, the memory of those disasters lingers on. Yeah. It's a huge country. There's a big desert in the middle of it. These planes, okay, now we are decades away. The planes are faster. They can refuel in air and so on. But in one case, the planes fell because they ran out of fuel. And they hadn't calculated the distance involved, the complexity of the country, the complexity of the borders. So if in the lingering memory of the US military, there is this notion that maybe Iran is not an easy country to conquer, that's not a bad thing. But in many ways, yes, he did try and he failed. As you, there was 4 attempts at rescue and they all failed.
Yeah, and of course the Republicans were not unhappy about that.
No.
Yeah, but so Iranians are not Arabs. This is the first misconception that people on the street often have. the Arabs. No, they're not Arabs, they're Persians. And they have a rich history and they have some experience in winning battles. So I would be very surprised if American... I read somewhere that the only way to instigate regime change is to have boots on the ground. But I do not believe even Trump is stupid enough to risk that.
Proper regime change, if you want to do it and install who you want, not just get rid of whoever is in power, i.e. actual change to your favor.
Which they did in Libya, in Iraq.
In Iraq. But
Syria.
even in Iraq, you see, they created chaos. I mean,
that's what I mean. Yes,
So the change was very short-lived, and Libya as well. So Iran is even more difficult. The territory is huge. The landscape is such that you have the Persian Gulf on one side, but then the rest of the country, quite a lot of the borders are very high mountains. So you're not going to have troops that can walk into this land. Yeah, there is no way you can walk in. You could presumably bring huge air cargo planes and land, but then where would you land them? In a country that is, I think it's about 4 times the size of UK, 3 times the size of France. So it's a big country to be able to do that. And that has worked in its favor in terms of land invasion. Yes, but there are other ways of organizing, maybe coups within the existing orders. There are all sorts of other plans that have been sought. So far, they haven't resulted in anything, and my guess is that the Americans are wary of that.
Now, there were a number of key events in the not too distant past. For example, let me know if I'm, again, exaggerating or if it's too much black and white, but the taking out of Hezbollah, the decapitation, basically. I mean, there were a number of attacks, the pager attacks. I mean, this is quite incredible if you look at the background of this.
All of these are weakening Iran. There is no doubt, right? So
define weakening.
Okay, so I have always argued that the proxies of Iran are not just sitting there in Lebanon or in Damascus or in Palestine in terms of Islamic Jihad, waiting for Iran to say, do this, do that, right? Hezbollah has its own existence. It has its own capital even. It's got its own financiers who are Lebanese. And its own ambitions in terms of political events in Lebanon, or it wanted to become either a very serious partner in the government, but also the government in Lebanon. And they had allies in the Christian community, as you know. But Iran could rely on them in terms of a buffer against Israel. So if Israel attacked, Iran's hope was Hezbollah would be in a position to defend Iran with land missiles, with attacks on Israeli land, because it's much closer. You don't have to go across most of the Middle East to get to Israel.
Syria, yeah.
And I think Israelis planned this very accurately. So the pager attack, decapitation, Nasrallah's assassination, these are all step by step made Hezbollah much weaker. It lost its governmental position. Yeah? So in a way, you could say there was a kind of regime change in Lebanon as a result of the weakness of Hezbollah. And then the bombings of southern Lebanon, the bombings of Beirut, the Shia districts of Beirut, all of this meant that buffer had gone. Iran couldn't rely on that. And that's why when the June attack happened, the 12-day war happened, Iran was on its own in some ways, having lost as well Assad. Now,
Syria,
again, Assad wasn't just a proxy of Iran. He'd been the son of a dictator, that's why, and became a dictator, and that's why he was in power in Syria. And the Russians had much more control of Syria than Iranians did. However, and from what I can gather, there were conflicts towards the end between Iran and Assad, in that Iran expected maybe Assad to do more about Palestine, about Gaza. I don't think that, I think at some stage revolutionary guards from Iran were in Syria to keep Assad in power, but towards the end he thought he didn't need them anymore. And so there was a conflict about the stay of revolutionary guards, Iranian revolutionary guards in Syria. But in any case, Turkey and Israel went through this regime change in Syria, and that was very bad for Iran, because whatever you can think of, the new ex-ISIS man, al-Shah, who is now...
I still have the wanted poster, 10
I know,
million.
he's still got the poster.
It's unbelievable.
So whatever you think of him, he's no friend of Iran.
Yeah.
He was in an organization that thought Shia Islam, because that's the ISIS position, is worse than Israel, or worse than the US, worse than anybody. So, yeah.
And today he was, not today, but last week or so, he was in the White House shaking, and it was I forgot the name now, but it was an American PR company who kind of gave him this complete makeover. Yeah, they taught him how to dress, how to cut his beard, how to behave. It's incredible. It's an American PR company who did this. Yeah, but briefly remaining at with Syria. Yeah? So basically, this is now Syria has become a free corridor now for Israel straight into Iran.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that was one part of the preparations to kind of make Iran even more isolated and vulnerable. Yeah. Because now Israel can basically, the airspace is free. Now I have what I will tell you now. I have from a Syrian military officer. He says they had stand down orders from Assad. Now at the beginning, so at the end, yeah. At the end, they had stand-down orders. He said he had a complete battalion ready, battle ready, but was instructed to stand down. Yeah, and he was not the only one, right? So he told me, so he didn't talk to me, but to someone. He said that at the beginning they did not believe it came really from Assad, but then they verified and it indeed came from Assad. And then his conclusion was, so that's the price Assad had to pay, that they let him out alive. And go to Russia. And one more thing, Assad also gave the Israelis all the military targets that they took out in the first 3 days. I think there were more than 800 military targets that Israel bombed in the first 3 days alone, and they had this information from Assad. Again, I'm just voicing what...
I think it's quite clear that the Russians had decided that Assad should leave, whatever reason they have, and I don't know what their rationale is. And I think he had already agreed in terms of what he would do, how he would give orders. One thing that is debated in Iran, and might be true, might not be true, is that in a way, Russia's relationships with Israel are a very complicated issue, as Mr. Putin occasionally said.
There are a lot of Russians in Israel, Russian Jews.
Yes, and in fact Putin made some claim which is not correct, but he once said that the second largest Russian-speaking country in the world is Israel. It's not true, because Ukraine is much bigger. A lot of East European countries have, Germany has more Russian speakers than Israel. However, it is true that he has a very complicated relationship with Israel. And I think Iranians who think that Russia is their ally are mistaken.
Yeah. So we covered Iran has definitely been weakened, and I would like just to highlight it for viewers who may not aware. Yeah? There were recent negotiations, and Israel took out the negotiators. Yeah, and this is not a one-off. We have seen this before. Yeah, so and then Trump did the same, right? So where does this? I mean, I interviewed the U.S. ambassador Charles Freeman a couple of times, and he said diplomacy is dead. Now, in that context, if you feel as a, let's say, Iran or any other country, you feel you are sitting at the negotiation table, yeah, and you're being taken out. So where does that leave international diplomacy, international law, these kind of things? Are we seeing a complete and I know I'm digressing a little bit, but do we see a decline of international institutions like ICC, ICJ, international law in general?
I think some of these institutions would always...
or UN even.
Or UN, yeah. But especially the ones, ICC and places like that, they were acceptable as long as they did not challenge US. And the moment they started challenging US, then, or Israel, the whole thing changed, right? In some ways, what we see from Trump or Orban or Trump allies everywhere in the world is a naked version of a pretense that, that we respect law, international law is
rules-based order.
Rules-based order.
Our rules-based order.
Rule, yeah. So at least now, in some ways, people can see with their own eyes there is no such thing. In my opinion, it used to be rule-based as long as it was in favor of US. But now that's why bother with it, because we know it can be complicated, so we just do away with it.
But can the kind of institutions that I already mentioned survive if the US pulls out, which they more and more do? I mean, are we looking at the complete collapse of, again, I don't want to put this label rules-based order on it, but international law. So if as a superpower like the US pulls out of, let's say, international law, can the international law still survive?
It will depend on the will of the others.
Like the Global South, that's what I'm aiming.
Yeah, if the Global South pulls its weight, yes. But has it got the will to do so, given that quite a lot of the Global South is ruled by dictators? And it will also, I think we are in a very dangerous position in that we are in a transition from one hegemon power maybe to another, right? And I think it will also depend on what China decides to do about these institutions, and will it use its own allies to pull its weight and stand up for some of these. Now, I am very skeptical about that, because as far as China is concerned, this is all very good for it. It's all good news, For years, they were victims of, you don't respect human rights. Now Trump says, who cares about human rights? And so it's good, Some of these Global South countries will try and persevere. The question is, they don't have the power to do so on their own.
Not individually.
Not individually, and even collectively, because the ones that have moved away from the poorer countries, and here I talk of India and China, they are no longer interested in the interests of Global South. They have become something else now, their own power.
You said the transition from one hegemon to the other. Yeah? Now, we globally, we at the tail end of, I said first 500 years, but I was corrected, 600 years-ish, Western dominance. So we are at the tail end. So it's deeper than one hegemon being exchanged with another one. So we as the West, the Western population, which is about 16% of the world population, if we count all the, let's say, NATO members as the West-ish, yeah, as a bloc, 16%. That's not a lot. So these countries, we, the West, the rich, powerful West, we have to get used to the fact that, you know, the power and the resources that we were able to draw over the last 500-600 years, this comes to an end. And one incident that kind of epitomized this for me was the US-led attack on the Nord Stream pipelines. I know it's a bit a jump, but it triggered what people call the deindustrialization of Germany and by indication Europe. And that brings me to a really interesting phenomenon that America often did and does things, or the American elite often did and does things that are not only on a surface level, but deep down against their own interests. And one of the, before I hand the microphone back to you, one of the interesting things was the whole becoming of Israel becoming a nuclear power. Because if you look at this, what really was here involved, starting with Ben-Gurion stepping out of office to avoid Kennedy pushing him to inspect the nuclear Dimona reactor prior to going hot, means at the time when they still could verify what Kennedy wanted to verify, and lying to him consistently in the communication that thanks to Kennedy recording, so Nixon was not the only American president who recorded the White House, Kennedy did too, so we know these kind of things. So when we dig into these kind of things and then look at the comparison with Iran nuclear force, yeah. So Israel, we know, everybody knows, has nuclear weapons. We know that. The proliferation of nuclear weapons has come from two countries, so Russia and America, to what, 7, 8? I don't know exactly, something like this. Yeah. And now we have this emphasis also, or the pretext, I'm not even sure, yeah, to avoid at all costs Iran becoming a nuclear power, right? So Netanyahu's, I should say this politely, well, let's just say he tried to draw America into a war against Iran for 20 years. And most recently, we all can remember those maps that he had with the bomb sign on it and these kind of things, yeah. So if we draw a comparison on how Israel obtained by stealing nuclear secrets with the help of a Hollywood billionaire, which is still in Hollywood, and Netanyahu at a time when Netanyahu was chief of staff in the Israeli embassy in Washington, I mean, stealing nuclear secrets and stealing nuclear material, actual physical material from the US, yeah. And then we look at how Iran is treated for trying to become an equal with Israel on that respect, bringing the discussion now to the 12-day war. That's a euphemism because it wasn't a war. Yeah. So will Iran stop to pursue the nuclear weapon, or did this event achieve the opposite? That all the moderate voices in Iran, they now say, look, the only thing that saves us, look at North Korea, the only thing that saves us is a nuclear bomb. That was a very long-winded...
No, it's very, very important, very important. Okay, so first of all, you are right. There was Iran with the mediation of Oman meeting Witkoff, direct representative of Shah, to discuss nuclear issues. I think the nuclear stuff is just a pretext. The question is the US and Western countries don't want Iran. They want a different kind of government in Iran. Not because this government is revolutionary, not because it's anti-imperialist. It doesn't even claim to be anti-imperialist. It says we are anti-arrogance of the West, which is different from imperialism. But they don't want it. They know, I think, they must know that Iran hasn't got nuclear weapons.
Yet.
It has reached a stage where it can,
Yeah.
but, and there is a big but, even if it achieves that, it will require a lot more work for it to have delivery of nuclear weapons. Having nuclear-grade uranium is one thing. Having a bomb ready to use
Put on a rocket and
on a
deliver it.
rocket is a different matter. So I think that those are all, and it's easy to sell the story, despite the stupidity of the arguments about Saddam having chemical weapons, and we all know it was a big lie.
Yeah.
It's still a good lie to sell to ordinary people. They look at these are mullahs, and they have a bomb, and the two shouldn't go together. That's the argument put forward.
But a right-wing, an extremist right-wing government in Israel,
Can have one, yeah.
and Noam Chomsky told me they will blow up the world, but who cares? They have God on their side.
Yeah. No, they do, and they have the delivery. In addition to the bombs, they have the delivery. And they have not been inspected. No one knows how dangerous these plants are. No one
Not
knows.
in EIA.
No EIA, no NPT, no non-proliferation. And I think then, so you're actually, Witkoff was saying Sunday, the next Sunday we will meet, we will achieve more, we will progress in this, right? And Trump was echoing this, and then you have a bombing of Iran. Now, what I find strange is that Trump first said, I stopped this war. Now he's saying I was in control when it started. So it's very confusing, but with Trump, you can expect that. So we are confused. My concern is that, well, there's two sides to this. First of all, a foreign country attacking a land unites...
It's a war crime.
Is a war crime.
According to international law, it's a war crime.
But it unites the people of that country with whoever is in power. I mean, it was a stupid thing. If you really wanted the regime to change in Iran, that was stupid. In addition to that, now you're right. On the one hand, there is talk of these negotiations. France is intervening. I hear Bin Salman, the wonderful humanitarian Saudi butcher is intervening. He's going to be the next negotiator. When he was in US, he told Trump, I will make sure there is negotiation. But who would believe that? You know, I mean, Witkoff is close to Trump, and there he was negotiating, and the bombs arrived. So it's very difficult. In Iran, no one knows, as far as I can tell, how much the damage was.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Well, the government, I assume, in Iran knows, but we don't know. Yeah. And the US doesn't know. So the US and Israel's initial response was, we obliterated. I kept hearing this word, and they all were repeating the same word. Yeah. And clearly, they haven't obliterated, because if there was, then there's no excuse. They have to find a new excuse. There isn't. Having said that, they clearly have damaged. They have damaged at least the... So my understanding is there's the nuclear industry in Iran. Quite a lot of it is built on the ground to be safe, on the cement, and so it requires bunker buster planes to be damaged and so on. But they have damaged the upper layers, the support side of the nuclear industry, if I'm not mistaken. Now, it can be rebuilt, but it will require time. And it has, I'm sure, delayed various projects. Not just the nuclear bomb project, but delayed the project, nuclear project in general.
Enrichment, etc.
Enrichment. And you are absolutely right. There are a lot of people in Iran now, most of them on the more conservative factions of the government, who are saying, we should just go ahead. We should just come out of NPT. We should just go ahead and build our bomb, and then we will remain a power. And they do point out that countries that do have nuclear power don't get attacked, or it's less likely that they get. On the other hand, there is the other faction, the reformists, who say we have no choice. We don't want another war. This time they will kill more of us. My understanding is that Pezeshkian, the president, was in a room where the plans were with the Israelis to attack this room, and they disbanded just before the attack. So the reformists actually, the people in the government, as opposed to the more conservative.
So you think they wanted to kill him?
I think they wanted to kill that ministerial meeting, whatever it was. Whether he was personally a target, I don't know, but they knew a government meeting was taking place. And I think people in Iran are in a very dangerous situation. On the one hand, they think the war is imminent. On the other hand, they think, well, what can we do, right?
What's your take? Will there be another war? I mean real war.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think what the Israelis are waiting is some phase of these stupid peace plans that Trump is putting forward to move forward, so they can say, we've done that. Yeah. And then they need full US support. And Trump is now concerned about the other issues that might win him a Nobel Prize, Ukraine and Gaza, right? So that's his priority.
Trump, I mean, we have we have elections next year in 2026, and I'm hearing that he will lose both houses.
Doesn't matter, because he's finished 8 wars so far, as you know, including one amongst countries that were never at war with each other, but that's a different. So I think for Trump right now, Israel attacking Iran is not the option. More importantly, his best friends in Qatar and Saudi Arabia are telling him, if the Iranian government is overthrown, there will be chaos, and that chaos is not good for Saudi Arabia or Qatar. United Arab Emirates is more, I would say, in some ways, United Arab Emirates wouldn't mind if there was a chaos and there was a war. I mean, they like chaos, as you see in Sudan, as you see wherever and they're closer to the Israelis. But Qatar, and one of the crucial factors here was the Israeli attack on Qatar. Clearly, Trump did put a stop to that. So
they forgot there's a huge American
military base there. Yeah. But also there's a huge military base, but also these people, I know this is difficult to believe in the 21st century, but these people bribe Trump with planes, with cash, with money. So I think we are in a situation where he doesn't want an immediate attack on Iran. Things might change if all his plans in Gaza go the way he envisages. I can't see it going that way. It's an impossible dream that he has, a nightmare for the Palestinians, a vision he has that will probably never happen. But if that progresses in his mind, never mind in reality, then he might give a green light. But at the moment, he's not giving a green light to Israel.
What would be the goal? I mean, is it just weakening, let's say, Iran as a regional power? Is it just to pacify
Israel? I think Israel wants the country Iran divided into lots of smaller countries.
It's exactly the federalization. It's exactly what they're trying with Russia.
Yeah. And that plan has possibilities, but it also has obstacles. One of the obstacles is that Iran's nationalities don't like the power of Tehran, but they consider themselves Iranian in some way because of the history, because this is not an Arab country. The notion of the mystified Persian Empire lives in the minds of Azeri Iranians, lives in the mind of lower Turk, Kurdish, and maybe even Arab Iranians. And that's a difficult hurdle to overcome.
So we have established Iran, at least at the moment, is on the back foot. Now, I have asked you before we started this little interview, I heard that about 80% of the Iranian population is against the mullah regime. Now, you nuance this a little bit, yeah, but at least you have about 20% who are for it. Now, what would be an alternative? I'm always, if people say, okay, remove Putin or remove Netanyahu, all problems are solved. I say, be careful what you wish for, because what comes next might be worse than what you have right now. So what would be an alternative? I mean, I don't want to go into kind of too much of speculation, but what would be a...
So first of all, I agree with you that 80% don't like this government. This is mainly the young as well, because the population of Iran is very much a young population. I think in 1979, the year of the revolution, it was 37 million people. Now it's 80 million.
83?
83, yeah, it's above 80. So it's quite a, so you can see all of this population.
And a lot of young.
I
forgot now. So I had the numbers. How many of the population are below 18?
Probably over 70%.
Yeah,
something
it's massive.
Like that.
It's massive.
It's massive.
This is a ticking time bomb, a demographic ticking time bomb.
Absolutely. And this is a generation that has grown up with new technology. Iran is not a backward country. When I hear of some of the technological uses of mobile phones, internet, in Iran, in terms of, for example, fines for cars, fines for women not wearing headscarf when they did used to fine. The system is quite advanced, but this generation has grown up with TikTok, with YouTube, despite the filtering, despite the fact that the government tries to reduce the access of satellite TV. Nowadays, you can, as long as you have Wi-Fi, you should be able to get a lot of it. So the 20%, though, has close association. I don't think it's ideological or a very small percentage.
Beneficiaries.
They are beneficiaries. They are people who are dependent on the government. And the question is, will they fight for this regime? Yeah. So for a regime to survive, these people have to fight. My guess is some percentage of them will, because the alternatives aren't that good. The problem for the other 80% who are, as I told you before, they're not, they don't like this regime, but they're also wary of being against it because of the vacuum you mentioned. Remember that for Iranians, they got rid of the Shah and ended up with worse, right? So it's not a hypothetical question. You witnessed it yourself in a way, or your parents have. So the question is, what are the alternatives? Israel had built this notion, and I don't know, I mean, people who know Israel say, no, Israelis weren't that stupid. But I think Israelis had bought this idea that the Reza Pahlavi, the son of the ex-Shah, is popular, and if they attack, he can bring the crowds into the street. Yeah. At least that's what they're
trying.
That's what they were saying. Yeah. This myth, this lie, was completely destroyed in less than 24 hours. Yeah. So there they were. People who were demonstrating against Israel. People were trying to save their lives. They were trying to save their buildings. They couldn't care less about Reza Pahlavi. The notion that he is popular is a very difficult one, because we now know that Israel spends a lot of money on bots, on social media, on Twitter, on X and Facebook and Instagram, to publicize his support. So whether this wave of support we see in social media is real or not, I'm very doubtful. My guess is quite a lot of it is artificial. I give you one example. Whenever I give an interview or say something against Reza Pahlavi, I get bombarded by people sending rude messages, nasty, threatening messages, and so on. And when you look at, if I don't do analysis of the text, I can give them to AI and see what it makes of it. But it's quite clear a lot of them are the same, are exactly the same. And this shows to you that this is not ordinary people because ordinary people would use different words. Yeah. This is clearly a bot doing this. So I would say that was a mistake to have this myth. This myth hasn't gone away. I mean, there are even European, Farage thinks the ex-Shahs would come to power. But it is quite clear that Trump and his immediate surrounding don't think so. And maybe the CIA has a better analysis of what is going on in terms of what has happened. On the other hand, the rest of the opposition has been terribly weakened. I can't see the nationalists. There are still Mosaddegh supporters, the National Front in Iran. They exist. Some of them have survived repression, arrest, and so on. They are all very weak. The left is completely divided and has no strategy, no plans, no existence. What can happen, and again, that wouldn't necessarily be any better, you might wish you hadn't done it, are formations within the current regime that would ally themselves with maybe some exiled forces to organize a change of power on the top.
You mean parts of the mullah regime? Or from the military? Or
well, the Revolutionary Guards now, because the army has been merged with the Revolutionary Guards. But Revolutionary Guards, senior layers of the Revolutionary Guards benefit financially from sanctions. Actually, despite the fact that sanctions are supposed to weaken the revolution,
they get the prices up the
they are the ones who have made billions as opposed to small amounts of money. So some of them might have allies with others. My guess is that some of those, let's put it this way, say Ayatollah Khamenei dies and there isn't a clear survivor, or Israel takes him out, as they can do. I mean, my understanding is, again, it's Trump who's stopping them. But in such a scenario, you will have people who will fight for power, and amongst them will be sections of the Revolutionary Guard who maybe have already prepared their plans for how they would do the change. And this change might appear to be not very significant, but might have long-term consequences.
Well, it removes a religious fundamentalist government with a military. Yeah. And Americans don't mind military governments.
The Americans don't mind, but this military can also still be a religious. We don't know. It depends on who their allies will be at the time. So yes, there are also. I don't think the reformist factions of the Islamic Republic have enough support to gain any allies amongst the nationalist or the liberal or Republican opposition, but maybe I'm wrong.
Not a very bright future if we look at it rationally, but then also black swan events can happen. If we even look at the recent mayoral elections in New York. Yeah, I mean, who predicted that? Yeah,
absolutely. You can't predict. One of the characteristics of a transition is the fact that it becomes far less predictable, and that's the.
Now, if we zoom out a little bit and look at China, Russia, and their interests in Iran. Now, a simplistic view on the Middle East points towards one thing: the lifeblood, still the lifeblood of the US, which is the oil, but even more so the petrodollar, right? And the petrodollar is under attack, as we know. Without petrodollar, I've said it before, without petrodollar, you don't have 11 supercarrier fleets on the oceans of this world. It's virtually what keeps them afloat. Now we are seeing maybe one step back. So Brzezinski already wrote in 1997 in his Grand Game book, no, he warned, not driving Russia in the arms of China. Now again, Ambassador Josh Freeman told me they were even more stupid. Now they put a nuclear-armed North Korea into the mix. Yeah. Now we have BRICS, the de-dollarization, the American weaponization of the SWIFT system, etc., etc. So those are all elements which I would put it mildly incentivize the opponents of the US hegemony to kind of find alternatives, right? Now, Iran is getting more and more aligned in that direction too, right? In as much as you can tell, can this realignment of Iran with, let's say, Russia, China, BRICS-ish, protect Iran to a certain extent? Is it beneficial? Is it,
It's a very important question. It really is the question of our time, but I'm not sure it can. There are various things. You are right that the US relies more on petrodollars than the actual oil. I think for the US there is a strategic issue, and that is stopping the flow of cheap oil to China. That's an important issue.
Well, they achieved the reverse by blowing up the pipelines, which now the same gas goes now to China. They've signed a 50-year contract, Russia, China.
Yeah. I know.
They achieved the opposite.
I know. Yeah. But in terms of the Persian Gulf countries, Iran, the Gulf countries, the aim there is to stop this even cheaper Iranian oil that is now going to China. In this, separating Russia and China must be a strategic aim. I would see Ukraine stuff as part of
absolutely,
trying to separate China. Yeah. China's relations with Iran is the same as its relations with all of the global South, including our neighbors, right? So there is this 25-year deal, which, as you know, has been signed and is progressing and so on. And Iranians think, oh, this is exceptional. It's not exceptional. Both the opponents of the deal and the supporters. China has similar deals with Saudi Arabia. Right? The question here is that I think China has ambitions beyond who they would support. So they would support someone as long as those ambitious strategic aims favor.
That's the same for any, under the realist model, John Mearsheimer, that's the same for everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. But you can see it, it's obvious, they're not hiding it, right? So, yes, China will buy cheap Iranian oil. Sanctions come, sanctions go, it will continue. It will try and use this digital currency to avoid paying in dollar and therefore avoid. And they now apparently say that the Iranian oil goes to Malaysian refineries and then goes to China. So they're trying to pretend it's not. I mean, everyone knows it's Iranian oil, but...
But I understood that they're already, even Saudi Arabia, I have to see now that I don't talk nonsense, they're already accepting Chinese yuan.
Yeah.
So openly, there is no more kind of pretense.
There's no pretense, and Iran is accepting it, but Iran has no choice. I mean, the sanctions are full. The question remains how far China will go on this, right? So if the current, whatever is going on, hidden negotiations, secret negotiations, which now apparently involves Oman and MBS, and Witkoff and whoever. If these fail, my guess is that Trump will try and make life absolute hell for the regime.
Yeah, they didn't really make it happen in Russia, but they said they have to get the chips out of the fridges so that they can fly their planes. That was complete nonsense. So wishful thinking, I would say.
No, it's true. But on the other hand, if the US puts pressure on China not to buy any Iranian oil, that would dramatically change the situation. The economic situation is bad in Iran. Just to let you get an idea, 120,000 2 months, maybe even more now, is $1. And even a year ago, it was 70,000. So you can see where it's going. Inflation is 40%. It's just, for ordinary people, life is hell. But yes, the rich are having a great time as well. So the gap between the rich and the poor is unbelievable. If China stops buying oil, if China stops, if China sees that secondary sanctions or fines on its bank, its finance institutions, are not in its favor, it will drop Iran. I don't think for China, Iran is a strategic ally. It's an important ally, but China will drop Iran because of the main strategy. Because the main aim is to become the global hegemon, so you sell people around you if you have to.
Is that so? Is that what you believe? China wants to become. Is that not a byproduct of what they do, or is it really the strategic aim to become the hegemon?
I think they do want to become the world power.
I could understand, looking at the history, the century of humiliation. Looking at Hong Kong, how came Hong Kong to be Hong Kong? You know, virtually at gunpoint, forcing China to accept opium from India, all these kind of things. So I could understand why they want to protect themselves against another 100 years of humiliation. But if you look at the policies, actually, I mean, America drives foreign policy virtually with the gun to the head of governments.
Absolutely.
China's approach is a different one.
China's approach is different. I'm not saying it's the same, but that doesn't mean they don't have the ambition to become the hegemon power. They do it differently. For example, in all of the BRICS deals, their approach is different. They do give different rates of interest. They do try and get the country involved in whatever plan there is. But at the end of the day, I think the financial benefits for China are you can't doubt there are financial benefits in those deals. And in the long term, it's not just that China wants to become a big power, it's that US can't maintain its power.
Very true. Through their own mismanagement. I don't want to digress too much into US, but US has profited twice from two world wars. US had the unipolar moment. US has this massive, and there's so many similarities with the UK. Both are islands, but they're kind of shielded, a power which I think in humankind, I mean, people sometimes compare the American Empire, which it is, with the Roman Empire, but this comparison pales because the current American Empire is way more powerful than any other empire ever was. Yeah. So I think that's the main strategy that America wants to maintain. They want to prolong the inevitable decline of 500-600 years of Western hegemony as long as possible. And I understand. I don't justify it, but I do understand. I mean, it's a natural reaction. Britain, the West, the Netherlands, Germany, whatever, we are pegged to this global system. We live and die with the US empire. This is simple how it is. Yeah. The challenges of what we're having now is that we are in the challenge of what I'm seeing right now, and I published actually a research paper on America's actual preparation for a hot war with China. And for some, it was really interesting. So for some reason, the former foreign minister of Malta read my piece. So I was a month ago or so, I was in Malta to interview him about that. Yeah. But I was surprised how far those preparations, and this is not a bluff. They're actually, I mean, Philippines has three new military bases, the money, the arms, whatever. Yeah? So America is preparing for a hot war with China. So apparently, Israel-Palestine is localized conflict. The Middle East could blow up, but whatever. Yeah? Ukraine, Russia. Yeah, we have another 55 hot wars going on at this very moment. Apparently, that's all not enough for the big empire, because now they're aiming Venezuela even. Yeah.
Yes, really.
But the main goal is, of course, China.
China.
Yeah. So in that context, where does it leave Iran? I mean, let's say we have an actual conflict situation, and it probably starts small. It will not start right away. It will be with nukes. Yeah. How would realistically Iran position itself?
Oh, Iran would position itself under those circumstances in the absence of any progress in what is going on, definitely with China. That's definitely the case. What I was arguing was that China is currently not the enemy of Iran, but it doesn't consider Iran an important player in its strategic plans.
I like how you phrased it. Currently not an enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And therefore, China will see what will be the long-term benefits of supporting Iran or not going to war with Iran, but reducing the level of support. Yeah. So China hasn't sent military support to Iran, either before the 12-day war, during the 12-day war, now, anytime. And there's good reasons.
Sorry, was there, as far as you know, was there a request from Iran for assistance? Was there something?
I think towards the middle of the 12-day war, Iran was desperate and was asking both Russia and China for support.
Did Iran believe that this 12-day, well, we didn't know this only going to be a 12-day war, but did they think this is going to be?
Oh, yeah. They thought this was going on. Yeah. And remember, psychologically, they had lost. They had been decapitated. Senior Revolutionary Guards had been killed. Rumors were the Israelis were showing, and the Iranian royalists were showing videos pretending that the entire leadership has left the country. This was AI-generated images of Khamenei on a plane leaving Iran. So they were psychologically under a lot of attack, apart from the military side of things. And there was relentless bombing. I mean, I was talking to relatives in Tehran. They were saying most of them, some who could, were leaving town, were going to the countryside.
Yeah, Trump said, you have to evacuate Tehran.
Tehran, 14 million people live in the city. You know, so psychologically it was and Iran did ask. And actually, the Iranian government, I think it's day 10 or something, announced that China has said they will send some military support. Now, the Chinese embassy in Israel immediately denied this, immediately. Like, I got both reports at the same time. Yeah? And it shows how China is sensitive to the concept that there should be a misunderstanding that somehow China has given arms to Iran, weapons to Iran.
Now, I hear constantly these 2,000 rockets that Iran has. I have to say, I was surprised for a couple of things. First of all, they seem to have supersonic rockets, which neither Americans nor NATO nor the Israelis could shut down. Maybe it's worth mentioning, I was in Amman, in Jordan, when the first time Iranian rockets flew over Jordan into Israel. We were in a restaurant with friends. Their son is calling, "Hey, mom, the house is shaking." Yeah, so they thought earthquake. But I'm mentioning this to illustrate how close that all is there. Yeah, so 2,000 rockets, supersonic missiles, of which I forgot. There's one thing. So the rest of the night, we were watching on social media, on small phones, impacts on Israel. Now, and for me, it looked like not AI generated. I mean, impact.
No, some of it.
Now, the next day, I watched international media, BBC, CNN, whatever. Yeah, the images that I saw there did not match what I saw in the night. So there were impacts in Israel way graver and more significant than I saw in any mainstream media at all. Yeah. But coming back to the 2,000 missiles, supersonic missiles, could Iran really hurt Israel?
Okay, they have invested a lot in missiles. And I think some of these missiles were damaged, but a lot of them still exist and they can produce more. Yeah. And of course, inside Iran, they say we did even more damage than what you're saying. I've seen films of parts of Israel that have been hit by these. Again, I think psychologically, one thing was broken for Israel and for the US. The Iron Dome wasn't as much of a...
Yeah, like Reagan's SDI program, yeah.
Yeah. So you can, they built this myth that there was nothing that will ever go through this. And so it was enough to break that dome. As you say, we know some missiles did land. They can't deny that. And that shows a level of missile capability. Yeah. The problem remains that US as an ally of Israel, has far more numerical and more powerful missiles and has far more air power. It remains one of the reasons it is still in power is because of its air power. And so that makes Iran can only do a defensive operation. Iran isn't a threat to Israel, contrary to what they say. You see, now, immediately after the war, Trump and Macron and everybody in Europe, the West, so to speak, were saying, oh no, the nuclear power is one thing. We now need to discuss the missiles. This should be no more missiles that can reach 400 kilometers.
Israel, basically. Yeah.
Basically Israel. So this has now become, if you like, even if Iran can manage a deal on the nuclear issue, they would go on to the missiles. And once the missiles is done, there'll be another story. Because the main issue is to have a pretext for attacking Iran.
But then, then again, the question is, what do they really want? Is it really, I mean, we talked about this federalization already, right? To make it simply weaker and to have more access, better, cheaper access to the oil. Is that it?
It's not the access to the oil. Iran has a young, educated population. It can, as far as they're concerned, it's a market. It's also a service place. I mean, you know how a lot of US internet companies use cheap labor in India.
Tell me something.
Iran can become another one. Mm-hmm. Iran can become the second source of that. It's both a market, a service sector. However, and here is their dilemma, if you start that kind of there will be civil war. You can't have this suddenly a small lovely republic in Kurdistan, one in Azerbaijan. It will be civil war. All sides will fight each other. And once that fight is gone, I can assure you.
Turkey, Kurdistan, for example.
Kurdistan. Yeah. And the nationalities amongst themselves, because once you start this kind of divisions, there's no end to it. Northern Kurdistan, and I'm a witness to this, I know from personal experience, North Kurdistan will fight Southern Kurdistan. So there will be no end to this. And that's the dilemma.
Not very encouraging thoughts. Yeah. Yassamine, we covered quite some breadth, and coming slowly to the conclusion of this interview. Is there any topic that's close to your heart that we didn't scratch on?
One thing that I want to say is about Iranian women. So Iranian women were the first victim of the new government, as you know. It wasn't just a headscarf. It was an attempt to stop them working and going out of the house and imposing family values and all the rest of it. And in many ways, despite all the repression, despite all the limitations that were put on them, they fought back. And now I see images in the last few months of Iran, very few women, at least in the urban areas, wear a headscarf. So there you are. They've actually defeated the government even on that. There's now this week a rumor that Khamenei has, there's a leaked document that shows how, for the government, they've discussed this and they've come to the conclusion they better let things go.
You mean a headscarf or more things?
Yeah, just forget about it, you know, let people do what they want. But the achievement is not that. I think the achievement is that in this wonderful institution, I go to science and engineering departments, and the percentage of women versus men is almost the same as when I was a student.
Which is?
About 10 to 12%.
Women. Okay, but you're, apologies, but you're in a kind of a technical, I mean, I say yes, but you're
technical,
kind of
science and engineering. In Iran, in the STEM, in science and engineering and mathematics, apparently 60% of undergraduates are women.
Interesting.
And in a way, I can see that the pressure has forced them to do that because they think that's the only way to get out of the repression. But it's an achievement of Iranian women. Some people put this as an achievement of the Islamic Republic. I would say no, they have achieved this despite the Islamic Republic. So that is an achievement. And I meet many of them as postgraduates here, and they really are determined people to continue their studies and so on. So yes, but not just in science and engineering, in every area you can see how women have worked hard to find their position against odds. And so if you look back at these decades, their achievements should be praised in many ways. And in some way, it's interesting because where people have tried to pretend to value in the global south, pretend to promote women or give them jobs in government and so on, the achievements aren't as good as this. So fighting for your rights is obviously the right way to get it.
And obviously, you're a woman, and not only that, you're an outspoken woman here in the UK. But you have also attracted some criticism. So I'm wondering, for your stance that you publish, what does the university? I mean, are they supporting you? How do you?
The Middle East Center is very kind to me. I'm not a member of it because academically I'm not associated with the Middle East Center, but they have been very kind to me. I became a member of the senior common room in St. Anthony's because of my association with the Middle East Center. They are not censoring me, but they are very nice people in the, as you know, there are academics who have been outspoken about Gaza, never mind Iran. So
and they lost their jobs.
And some have lost. In this university, so far, touch wood, they haven't, but yes, touch wood, but yes. So I haven't. But in terms of general pressure, yes, you do. And I'm in a worse position because the royalists, the right wing, accuse me of being too anti-American, therefore I must be supporter of the Islamic Republic. I attack Israel, I support Palestinians, so I must be pro-Islamic Republic. And the Islamic Republic doesn't like me because I always criticize them for dictatorship, corruption, human rights, and so on.
If you say the Islamic Republic doesn't like you, how do you notice? How do you know?
In the past, it was worse, in that occasionally my relatives were told...
That's what I mean,
yeah. In more recent times, it's different. So what happens occasionally is they cut an interview I've given to BBC Persian, for example. They cut the bit where I'm talking very strongly against Israel in support of the Palestinians, and then they don't put the bit where I say Iran's problems are this, and that. But obviously, I can't go back. I'm well aware. I don't have citizenship. I'm not someone they want back. Let's put it this way.
You probably put it modestly and kindly, they don't want you back.
I spent a bit of time in Kurdistan when I was working on the radio station of a left-wing organization. So I spent some time.
Yes, I saw something you supported. What was it?
Fedayeen.
Fedayeen.
Yeah.
Ah, I forgot. We should have. Okay, tell me briefly. What was that? I mean, fedayeen. This is like.
Yes. So I was in UK, having. Okay, so I had gone briefly to Iran after the revolution. I stayed a while. My husband is English, so it came to a situation where it was very difficult to live in Iran. Especially, we were there during the hostage crisis. So when we went into the street, people were shouting, "Yankee, go home." My family were worse because they were paranoid about his safety and so on. So we had to leave. But while I was in Iran, I met some supporters of fedayeen organization. And here I was in the student supporter group of the organization. In Glasgow. I lived in Scotland at the time, in Glasgow, and in Britain. They had a national supporters group. I was in that. During this period, a member of the fedayeen came abroad to recruit people to set up a radio station in Kurdistan. And obviously I was trying to find a recruit for them because I was one of the national organizers. And we couldn't find anyone. And then suddenly I thought, well, I've done electronics engineering, so maybe I can do it. And the person who they have sent said, yeah, why not? Let's do it. So I did this short training in Zurich, of all places, with a very suspicious group of German, Swiss people who were in, I think, some dodgy left-wing organization. They knew who the fedayeen were. I didn't know who they were. And they trained me with this radio station work, and I went back to Iran. Right? So this was very strange. Everyone was leaving Iran. I was going.
But was that not a bit risky?
Okay, so the fedayeen took me through a non-border person.
Even more risky.
Well, yeah, but there was. I mean, I went illegally back to Iran, and this is part of the reason the regime will never forgive me, because I was part of that organization. So I went back to Kurdistan. I went into Kurdistan. I stayed in a base where was the main base for the organization. By that time, the Central Committee had moved there because there's been so much death and executions and so on. So the Central Committee was there. The paper was being half done in Tehran, half there. The editor of the paper, who was a woman, she moved between Ahmadzadeh. She moved between Tehran and Kurdistan. The radio had to be put in a mountainous region. This was in more flat parts of Kurdistan. So they moved me and the group of people who were building the tents and building the antennas and everything to a mountain village near Shah. Those who know Kurdistan will know, but it's beautiful, fantastic mountains covered in forests. And we had a base there, and the winters were terrible. The spring and summer was okay. And we managed something. It was very limited. Later, that radio progressed much further. But while I was there, we just did the basics. We didn't have electricity. We had to produce the energy there and motor power. The technical side is irrelevant. The experience of meeting the Kurdish people, I lived with a peasant family. The base was mainly men, so they were in one part. I was living in a family, and the radio was in this peasant house. And it was interesting. It's a whole different world. Kurdish, so-called. At that time, that was liberated areas. And of course, you met all sorts of important, well, later important people like the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the Kurdish Democratic Party. There's an area between Iran, Iraq, and Turkey, which is called the Valley of the Parties. And that's more or less now it's controlled, but was more or less lawless Kurdish land.
Can you go to Turkey?
I can still go to Turkey, yeah. Because they didn't mind the Iranian Kurds. They didn't like their own Kurds. They didn't they didn't mind the Iranian.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your time today. I could go on and on, but I really enjoyed our conversation.
So did I. Very good questions. Very well organized.
You're very kind.
Thank you
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.